Welcome to the Property Corner with myself, Rowan Alexander. Welcome back. On today's episode, I'm going to be telling you a bit more about that investment property that I announced I had purchased earlier in this year. We're going to have a look at what's transpired since I've made that purchasing decision and where we're standing at this point in time. So I bought a residential property at the end of 2023 with the idea of changing the usage and going through a rezoning application to create some form of a business premises, something like offices, which would be suitable for the area. Today I'm going to reveal where that property is located. I have taken ownership and I'm now the owner of this property, and I can now share some more details with you. The property is located in 18 John Gainsford Street. It's in Brackenfell. It's an old residential area where there were primary residences. 53 years old. This area is now sort of almost being absorbed into the CBD of Brackenfell. The city has identified it as a transitional area, and they are supporting rezoning in the area. And if we have a look at the City of Cape Town zoning map, it actually shows that quite clearly. So that is 18 John Gainsford Street over here. You can see SR1, which means that it's zoned as single residential 1. That's a zoning classification, which determines your usage rights. In the area surrounding it, you'll see a number of purple properties zoned as GB1. That's General Business 1, and that's the rezoning that I intend applying for. This area used to all be single residential homes, and over the years, as this area has sort of aged and almost been included into the CBD, you can see that a number of businesses, especially along the more sort of heavily trafficked roads or the major roads, you'll see they actually went through the rezoning first. Very often due to their desirability of visibility and so forth. My business premises is actually number 26 John Gainsford Street, which is on this corner. If you know the area, you'll see that this is actually a very prominent site with a lot of visibility from the road. So that's why these sort of ones would have maybe gone through this rezoning first. And now you start seeing that creeping down the road, because this whole area has been designated a transitional area by the city. If we look at where that is, just to give it some perspective, it's Jannie Engelbrecht Street down to Old Pole Road and H.O. de Villiers to the Brackenfell Boulevard. It's this whole area that has been earmarked for where rezoning is actually supported at this point in time. So looking at the actual house, if we go into street view, we'll use that for now. We can see that the property is heavily overgrown. The house is 53 years old. The tenant that was living there for 37 years. It was an elderly lady who spent a lot of time outside in the garden. You can see, the garden is heavily overgrown. In this road, you can actually start seeing the typical residential house. The neighboring property is still residential. But as you start moving down the road, you can get a sense of what a rezoned property would look like. This property, I know, has been converted into office space, and you can see the street front and the curb appeal is far more appealing now that it's gone through this rezoning, and that there's been some reinvestment into the area. So hopefully soon my property would look something like this, and I would have created a suitable business premises. So where am I at this stage? I've taken ownership. I've now consulted. I had first round consultations with a trusted commercial real estate broker that I know in the area that knows these products. I've actually spoken to 2 of them, and they've given me insights into what there would potentially be a market for. So I've started my thought process when I bought the property. I thought of doing something very similar to our existing building, where I would just rezone from a house to a single office, that would be rented out to one tenant. There is a need for that in this area, so there is a market for that. And then 2 other needs were identified by both brokers. The first need was for a sort of co-working, shared working space. The premises does lend itself towards that, where you maybe have a central entrance, central reception, shared facilities in terms of boardrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, but maybe renting out to multiple sort of service providers or professionals that don't need a 200 square meter office, but maybe are looking for 10 or 15 or 20 square meters, and we can actually share those facilities, run it as a sort of managed building where I provide the services to them of a receptionist, of cleaners, and you create a co-working space. So that is one of the thoughts that are being explored. And then the third thought is that of a ECD, Early Childhood Development Center. There seems to be a big need in the area for premises that are suitable for ECDs. Those are the three options on the table at this stage. I've employed an architect. He is looking at the design of all three of those sort of options. And I've also consulted with a town planner who is giving insights into those three options, what it would entail, what the limitations and restrictions may be, and whether those things would be supported in the area. So very early on, I haven't made a decision yet as to which of those three I would pursue. We are exploring them, and by looking at the structure and what changes would need to be made to that, I can get to a point where I can look at the viability thereof. So on a very high level, we're looking at layouts, we're considering accessibility, the requirements in terms of rezoning for things like parking, access, fire regulations. Without getting into detail, just seeing how those things would actually fit and pan out on the property. Second to that, since taking ownership, I've started clearing out the property. That's actually been quite a nice process. I've actually quite enjoyed it. So the first thing that I did was to get rid of those plants. I will not be able to reuse those plants, especially in the front garden where we're probably going to have to create parking and access to the building. But there's a lot of plants which could be reused. So what I did was I created a Facebook marketplace or a local community post on a number of our community groups, and I offered these plants for free to anyone who was willing to come and remove them themselves. By doing that, these plants could be reused in other premises, and it wouldn't have any cost for me to actually get rid of them. So it was a win-win for both parties. I was inundated with requests, and probably over a week period, at least 100 people stopped by the property. They removed different plants. We had a community center from one of the neighboring areas who came out with a team and actually removed plants for a garden that they were installing at the community center. We had private individuals that were just looking for a particular plant, that they had seen in the photos. And I'll share some of these photos with you, and you can see how densely sort of overgrown this property was. And just by looking at these photos, you can see that there was no way that you can actually retain this and try and create a business premises. Everything needs to be removed. We will have to replant and create a new garden, which sort of works with the new design that we end up doing. So I do intend creating a nice garden and a nice curb appeal again, but unfortunately, this couldn't be retained. It was nice, as the owner of the property, it did feel nice, getting those messages of thankfulness after the fact. A lot of people thanked us for the generosity in actually allowing them to come and remove the plants. And it was especially rewarding and fulfilling when something like a community center who could not afford to buy plants, had actually come around and removed. So second to that, I've started cleaning up the outside. Once all those plants had been removed, started cleaning up the outside. We identified that big tree in the front garden, a portion of it had actually already torn away and fallen over. And I had an assessment done on the tree, and it was regarded that tree actually had to be cut down. It was a safety issue. So that I've done, cleared out the yard in the front and the back, and now I've moved my efforts to the internal side of the property. I've put some workers in there who are breaking out the floors, breaking out the kitchen, the bathroom areas and creating a shell, an empty shell, which I will then use for whichever direction I choose. I can now start seeing what this bare structure is that I'm working with. Floors and built-in cupboards are handled on the same basis, where I offered it at a really reduced price. I had some very valuable parquet flooring in the property. When I say valuable, it's expensive to refit. If you had to do parquet flooring today, the service providers and contractors have informed me that it would be about 2,000 Rand a square meter to do that equivalent floor. I did look at retaining it, with it being such a valuable floor. I did have hopes of retaining it and maybe reusing it in the building, but the costs of removing it to allow for alterations and then reinstalling it, the viability of that didn't really make sense. So I've made the decision to remove the wooden flooring and sell that, as well as the cupboards within the building. The cupboards are old, but they were in very good condition. So I've offered that to people who have come to remove it. And then the remainder, of what's installed in the property is of no value and actually needs to be removed. So I've taken off all the skirtings, I've taken off all the doors, I've removed the ceilings. That's been an ongoing process so that we can really see the bare structure, identifies the roof in the sound condition, which walls are actually load bearing, which can be removed. These are all things that we're going to have to take into consideration when sort of reviewing which direction we take, whether it be a single office, shared working or co-working spaces, or this ECD. There'll be limitations of what we can do on the site. And by removing everything and stripping it to a bare shell, I can now, I think, better identify challenges that I may face in going one of those three directions. So over the next coming weeks, what I'm going to be doing is reviewing the architectural plans, having discussions again with the town planner, with these concepts that we come up with, how they would be received, and making a decision as to which route we go. If you were this property owner and you had bought this, what would you do? Which of these three options would you have considered? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to see how this property goes along and you want to see us unpack this journey. Going forward, we're going to be looking at the financial aspects. We're going to be looking at the timing, and we're really going to follow this process until the end. I'm going to leave you with some imagery of the progress that we're making, so that you can get some insight into what this past 2 or 3 weeks have been like at 18 John Gainsford. Thanks for following. I look forward to sharing this journey with you. This front garden combined with the rear garden, we removed about 38 cubic meters of garden waste. This is the entrance to the building. You can see the older designs, still some big patios in the front, undercover patios. So this was the main bedroom. You can see this is where the built-in cupboards were that we've removed, and the ensuite bathroom. You can see we've broken everything out. Yeah, this was the living area. All of these bedrooms, as well as this living area, is where the wooden parquet flooring was. It was in a very good condition. Unfortunately, as you can see, for it to have survived the extent of these renovations, it was probably going to be quite a task. In addition to that, if there were any parts that needed to be patched or that needed to be redone, it would have come at a very high cost. So while it would have been nice to retain, unfortunately we couldn't. One of the things that were difficult to identify was which of the walls were load bearing, especially with the ceilings in. I had an engineer get into the ceilings and have a look, or into the roof, but now that we've actually removed the ceilings, you can quite clearly see. Remember, these old properties, the trusses were not constructed off-site and then pre-designed and brought onto site like they do in modern construction. These were actually constructed on site. So if we have a look, you can see that there's actually a load on that wall, and these sort of wedges that you see along the way, they actually identify that the truss is lying on that roof. So having removed the ceilings, we can now see the roof structure and we can inspect the integrity thereof, but also have a look at how we will do our isolation. Remember, when this house was built 53 years ago, the isolation standards weren't what they are today. Looking at the roof tiles, you'll see in a modern house, between the wooden roof structure and the tiles, you'd actually see a product called sisolation, which is a form of isolation, but it also serves as a bit of a waterproofing barrier, because if your wind blows sort of into the tiles, that would actually cause the water to drain away too. With this sort of pitch roof, the pitch is quite steep, so you wouldn't necessarily need it from a waterproofing perspective, but it would be very nice to have it from a thermal insulation perspective. So we are looking at options how we would address that going forward with retrospective products that we can use to provide proper insulation to the property. That makes the property more energy efficient, and it also just makes it more comfortable to spend time in. This was the bathroom. You can see we've removed all the sanitary fittings as well as all the plumbing. Nothing would be reused. And this was the kitchen space. I mean, look at the size of this kitchen in relation to the property. It's a large backyard. I've had the trees trimmed just to open up and removed all of the plants. All of these trees that you see here will be retained. What does quite excite me and what excited me about this building is the fact that you've got this large open space in front, which can be used for parking. Parking is typically one of your biggest challenges when going through a rezoning application, the parking requirements, but with the space that we've got in comparison to the size of the building, parking can be sufficiently catered for.